Chapter 21, Ninth Rank Mage. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. After Lin Yun came out, he only did one thing, which was to hand out a few dozen bottles of compounded potions to the old butler, before returning to the alchemy laboratory. As for the operation of the Gilded Rose, Lin Yun wasn't the least bit worried about it. It was because the old butler was overseeing it. That person had followed Loch Merlin for a few dozens of years, and he was very talented at handling the business side of things. Despite being short on funds, he still managed to tidy up the Gilded Rose in such little time. This showed that there was nothing to worry about. Besides, there were also those potions. Indeed, those weren't ordinary alchemy potions. When Lin Yun analyzed the dragon blood ink, he wrote down the recipe. Afterwards, he discovered that even though he had insufficient materials to craft the mana baptism, there would be no problems compounding some potions that had some of the desired effects of that potion. Although these similar potions didn't have the effect of improving one's constitution as the mana baptism potion did, it would still be beneficial for helping magic apprentices that were attempting their first mana gathering. In other words, the customer base that this potion aimed at was just the apprentices. Even a subpar apprentice would be able to easily become a 9th rank magic apprentice after using this potion. Lin Yun felt that this kind of potion would have a lot of appeal to the huge numbers of magic apprentices that were still struggling to advance. At the very least, there would be no issue with the daily expenses of the Gilded Rose. With no worries left in mind, Lin Yun returned to the alchemy laboratory and didn't come out for 3 months. Lin Yun spent all his time on magic studies. It might be very hard for the mages of this era to understand why a young, 20-year-old man who had just become a mage and was on the level of a 5th rank mage would be so demanding toward himself. After all, becoming a 5th rank mage was already an amazing achievement. As long as nothing unexpected happened, he would definitely be able to advance to become a great mage before the age of 30. After that, he would still have time to try to break through to the high mage realm. And if he became a high mage, he would be on the same level as those 3 big shots of Sage Tower, one of the few at the top overlooking Thousand Sails City. How could he not be satisfied with such an achievement? But Lin Yun was different. He had personally experienced that mana-exhausted era in the future. He had seen mage after mage leaving the cover of the shelter tower just to have the chance to gather a bit more mana from the void. Most of them never returned after leaving. Lin Yun felt like this was heaven. Mana everywhere, abundant natural resources. It felt like the most beautiful dream. The few days after his transmigration, Lin Yun didn't even dare to go to bed. He had been afraid of waking up and finding out that the dream had suddenly disappeared. What Lin Yun felt when he was finally convinced that this wasn't just an ephemeral dream was something that couldn't be understood by the mages of this era, just as they couldn't understand why Lin Yun was being so hard on himself. To Lin Yun, the freedom of being able to absorb mana, to be able to study magic at will, this was a huge joy in itself. This demanding attitude that ordinary people couldn't comprehend, along with knowledge far surpassing his era, allowed Lin Yun to walk a path that would take most mages 10 years, in just a few months. After 3 months, Lin Yun secretly reached the 9th rank. This was but a step away from the Great Mage realm. To Lin Yun, only by becoming a great mage would he consider himself to have mastered his own power in this body. There was only a 1-word difference between mage and great mage, but they were 2 entirely different things. Once a mage crushed his mana whirlpool, he would tread on the path of growth as a great mage and would step into a completely new world. Even the amount of mana gathered and expelled during meditation would be a few dozen times higher than what a common mage would process. Not to mention the appearance of all kinds of meta-magics following the breakthrough. Saying that a great mage could casually kill 10 normal mages in a fight without even breaking a sweat, this was no exaggeration. But Lin Yun couldn't take that step. The flaw of Merlin's body was too serious. If he wanted to advance the last step to become a great mage, he only had one realistic solution, which was the mana baptism. He actually had the dragon blood, but he still was far from having all the other materials gathered up. Raymond had yet to return from his travels, so there might be no solution on that side. Seems like I have to find ways to get them from the Sage Tower. Lin Yun sighed and kept the dragon blood preserved in ice. It was the most plausible place to find them. If there was any place in the entire Thousand Sails city that could collect all the materials needed by Lin Yun, then it would definitely be the Sage Tower. 3 high mages, a dozen great mages, hundreds of mages, as well as countless magic apprentices. Heaps of magic materials were used every day. Only such a place could satisfy Lin Yun's needs. It has also been a long time since I've been to the library, Lin Yun thought. He tidied up a bit, planning to check out the library once more and also ask Solon whether he could buy some materials from the Sage Tower on the way. Boss. But when he came out, he was greeted by Remy, gasping as he ran over. What? Boss Pavy sent me to find you and ask you to return at once. He said that Fario brought people to surround your house. Eh? Lin Yun was honestly quite astounded when he heard that. Do you think that bullying me is easy? I already gave you the money, but you still brought people over to surround my house. Looks like I need to leave a stronger impression on you. In that case, Remy, go to the Sage Tower for me. Look for a mage named Solon and then give this to him. Lin Yun fished out a slip of paper from his bag, and on it was the list of materials that he still needed to make the mana baptism. Ask him if he is able to help me out by finding those materials. Yes, boss. After sending Remy away, Lin Yun headed home. Just outside the house, he saw many people surrounding the place, headed by that cheap uncle, Fario. Perhaps it was due to the fact that he was surrounded by a lot of people, but he seemed to be overwhelmingly confident. He had his hands on his hips as he stood outside, bellowing with his shockingly loud voice. The thief must be in that house. I saw him with my own eyes. So bold, he dared to steal things from the Viper Nest. Everyone, search carefully after going in. Make sure to find that damnable thief. That cheap uncle was getting greedier and greedier. While getting down from the carriage, Lin Yun mumbled, trying to use an escaped thief as an excuse. As if that would work. If this was really the case, everyone would go to the Sage Tower or the Monchai's Manor to search for thieves. No thief, you say? No way. I saw it with my own eyes. You must be an accomplice? After getting down from the carriage, Lin Yun didn't feel too worried as he looked at Fario and his people from the distance. About 30 to 40 people with pretty good strength, especially that middle-aged man wearing a grey gown. It seemed like there was actually a 9th rank mage. That was rather excessive. Someone at the 9th rank would already be a first-rate existence among most mages. Only one more step and he could reach the Great Mage realm. To invite someone of that level, a few thousand gold wouldn't be enough. How could Fario be brave enough to do something so bold? Lin Yun frowned. This was very abnormal. Why was Fario going so far? At the start, he had come with an 8,000 gold debt. Lin Yun had thought that this cheap uncle was only taking advantage of Locke Merlin's promise to try to stake his claim on the house. Thus, after disabling Jimmy's right hand for his actions, he didn't make things too difficult for that cheap uncle and even paid him the debt after the sale of the Spectrum potion. But now it seemed that it wasn't that simple. At that time, he had demanded the money quite shamelessly, but he did indeed have the contract, which had its terms written in black and white. But now, trying to use the pretext of a thief to enter the place. Way too greedy. This was completely unreasonable, not to mention that he had invited a 9th rank mage. Lin Yun believed that if there wasn't a special reason, Fario would never be willing to part with so much money to hire someone like that. Is there something about the house? The more Lin Yun thought, the more he felt that it was possible. Otherwise, why would Fario specifically bring up taking the house to repay the debt when he first came? And now, he also wanted to search the house. If it wasn't about the house, why would Fario come time and time again for the house? Let's go. Everyone follow me to look for the thief. Before Lin Yun could think further about what the issue with the house was, Fario shouted loudly and led everyone to force their way in. It's a bit too much. How could Lin Yun let them go ahead? It wasn't a tavern where everyone could enter. To dare steal the stuff of the Viper Nest, truly a bold and ambitious person. You thought I couldn't find you if you hide here? Maybe it was because he had a 9th rank mage behind him. but Fario seemed especially excited today. With such a powerful mage supporting him, Fario took the lead in an awe-inspiring way. This was a 9th rank mage. Not that many of them could be found in the entire Thousand Sails city. With such support, what could he be scared of? Aren't you very powerful, Maffa? Instantly disabling Jimmy's right hand and treating me like a fly. Now I have a 9th rank mage with me. What can you do if I force my way into your house to catch a thief? Strange. Why is the soil so soft? Apostrophe. What's going on? Isn't this the entrance? Why does it feel like I'm trudging through a swamp? Fario looked down at the ground. Chapter 22, Meta Magic. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. The agitation then turned into a blood-curdling screech. Fuck, this really is a swamp. Fario was trapped inside the swamp. His fat body was desperately struggling, but the more he flailed, the quicker he sank down. In a short time, he was chest deep in that black mud. Careful. This is a rotten swamp. The 9th rank mage in the middle of the group shouted a warning to the Viper Nest group while quickly casting a spell. Rotten Swamp was only a 3rd rank spell, so it couldn't enter the eyes of a 9th rank mage. One soil petrifaction would easily solve it. In fact, the 9th rank mage did just that. He quickly chanted his incantation and that soil petrifaction spell quickly took shape. As long as he controlled the spreading of the rotten swamp, they could easily take their time to help Fario escape from it. But, just when the 9th rank mage was about to cast the spell, a deathly chill blanketed the area, and before he could react, the swamp was already frozen over. The 9th rank mage suppressed the soil petrifaction spell. It wasn't even a matter of whether he should cast it or not anymore. At this moment, he felt a small backlash, and this pain was truly hard to bear with. The swamp was already frozen, so his spell was simply meaningless now. But he couldn't just not do anything. Did he have to helplessly watch as Fario was turned into an icicle? This was someone that the chief had personally asked him to protect. Fortunately, the 9th rank mage didn't have to keep thinking for long, because Lin Yun had already approached. How come you are so free today, uncle? Lin Yun walked along a small path, not getting close to the 9th rank mage, who was still dumbfounded. He stopped at the edge of the frozen swamp and squatted down and smiled as he looked at Fario. Release me. Fario had never been in such an awkward situation before, with more than half of his body frozen in the swamp. Under the bitter chill, his teeth were chattering constantly. It felt as if countless knives were cutting his body. He couldn't escape, but he wasn't sinking either. After the swamp completely froze over, it was as hard as steel. Not to mention Fario, even a 10th rank warrior wouldn't be able to struggle free. Sure, I can get you out without any problem. But, uncle, there is something I don't understand. You brought so many people to my house today. What for? Capturing a thief. Fario just started talking when he suddenly felt emptiness open up below his feet. He sank down a bit more, feeling completely terrified. Fario waved his arms around wildly as he shouted, "Quick, grab me. Pull me up." Uncle Fario, you are definitely dishonest. Only when half of Fario's face was left above the swamp did Lin Yun casually grab Fario's collar. Are you such a magnanimous person that you would muster such a large force for a thief? Get me out first. Fario urged in a muffled voice, not saying any more this time. Thus, Lin Yun didn't say anything else and simply loosened his grip. As Lin Yun let go, Fario let out a blood-curdling shriek. The two fat hands flailed around chaotically, trying to clutch onto one last hope for survival. After struggling, he barely managed to grab the corner of Lin Yun's gown. Fario held on as if his life depended on it. Maffa, I am your uncle. Get me out of here. Enough. Fario, shut up. The 9th rank mage who had been watching the play while completely dumbfounded finally shook himself out of his stupor. He raised the staff in his hand and a vine suddenly appeared beside the frozen swamp. Imbued with the surge of mana from the 9th rank mage, this vine grew to have a length of a few meters and the thickness of an arm. Immediately afterwards, the vine swept over the struggling Fario and he was pulled out from the frozen swamp. Steadily dropped on the ground. I wasn't done questioning yet. Lin Yun patted the dust from his gown while grumbling, but he didn't actually care that much. He was quite sure that Fario was at most an errand boy. No matter how much he questioned him about it, he wouldn't learn much. Moreover, there was still that 9th rank mage. That mage had no idea that he had been silently marked as a target for questioning. He was frowning, looking at the young mage causing problems for him. This young mage had to be the owner of the house, Maffer Merlin. He seemed to be about 20 years old and wearing a brand new black gown, so he shouldn't have been a mage for long. And judging from the 2 spells he had cast, he was probably somewhere between 3rd and 6th rank. This strength could be considered pretty good for a 20-year-old youth. But it was just pretty good. As someone at the peak of mages, he could easily crush such a young mage. Thus, the 9th rank mage didn't bother being wordy with the other side and directly told him, Maffer Merlin, hand over the deed and I'll guarantee that I'll let you and the people living in the house go. Let me think about it. Lin Yun surprisingly didn't refuse outright, showing a complicated expression instead. You'd better consider it well. I rarely give such a chance to people. I'll give you 10 seconds to choose whether you'll die with the deed, or hand it over to save your life. I was thinking about whether I should let all of you off or not. The entire area went silent after Lin Yun's words. The 9th rank mage's face was filled with shock. He didn't dare to believe what he had just heard. After being left speechless yet again for a few seconds, he finally reacted. He hadn't misheard. That young mage truly said that he was considering if he should let them off. You are courting death. The 9th rank mage took a deep breath and barely restrained his anger. When he spoke, his voice was cold and sinister. Cold and sinister voice, ashen expression. Even Fario, still shivering on the side, could see that this 9th rank mage was truly infuriated. This was a clear provocation. Putting aside the fact that he was a peak existence among mages, even if he had been less powerful, he definitely wouldn't have been able to put up with it. Kill him. The infuriated 9th rank mage waved his hands, and the few dozen subordinates, who were looking at Lin Yun like he was their prey, simultaneously advanced toward him. They were elites of the Viper Nest, with the weakest one having the strength of a 3rd rank, and the most powerful one already at the 7th rank. With a few dozen of them, that force was not inferior at all to most average mercenary groups. To be able to casually send such a force, besides the few peak powers, in the entire Thousand Sails city, only the Underworld's Viper Nest could do so. That group of elites from the Viper Nest was made up from 3 different kind of classes: archers, warriors and thieves. When the 9th rank mage gave his order, their warriors and thieves unsheathed their weapons and rushed ahead. The archers took position on favorable terrain in an instant while knocking their arrows, waiting for the fight to start before piercing the target's chest like vipers. As they rushed out, some of them even cursed inwardly. For just a 20-year-old mage, did they really need to use elites of the Viper Nest? But soon, they didn't dare to think that way anymore, because Lin Yun had already completed his first spell. Another rotten swamp formed once again. Not even 10 meters from Lin Yun, more than a dozen warriors holding large swords had been rushing up at him. Before the ground beneath their feet suddenly softened, they felt as if something was dragging them down, pulling them into the muck. No one could have expected that Lin Yun would be able to cast a spell this quickly. Rotten Swamp was a 3rd rank spell. An ordinary mage would need at least 20 seconds to cast it. Even a 9th rank mage would still need about 10 seconds. But that Rotten Swamp had fully formed in less than 5 seconds. What kind of concept was that? This was almost an instant spell. This was an inconceivably quick Rotten Swamp. It instantly broke the rhythm of the group from the Viper Nest. Among the few dozens of fighters from the Viper Nest, the few thieves had yet to come around to surround him, and the archers had suddenly loosed their arrows in panic, causing them to be lacking in accuracy. More than a dozen arrows shot out, but some weren't even close, and the rest seemed to miss Lin Yun ever so slightly, not even touching his clothes. The most frightening part was that Lin Yun had already readied another spell. This second spell was even faster than the first one. It was completely instantaneous, with no incantation and no gesture, only a sharp icicle spell. Only a whistling sound pierced through the air as the large icicle ruthlessly flew forward, instantly piercing an archer's shoulder. This didn't slow the icicle's momentum as it kept going and nailed itself to a tree, along with the unlucky archer. his advantageous terrain became the most loathsome location for him. The icicle was the size of an arm, and it had pierced straight through his shoulder, pinning him to the tree. This kind of pain was hard to bear, even for an elite of the Viper Nest. A mournful scream echoed, and all those who heard it felt a chill. Meta magic? The 9th rank mage froze as he recognized what had happened. Chapter 23, Questioning. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. He was a powerful 9th rank mage, so how could he not know the casting time of these spells? That rotten swamp was already very abnormal. A mere 5 seconds to materialize this 3rd rank spell. Even as a 9th rank mage he couldn't do something like this. Not to mention that the following icicle spell had been cast without any incantation at all. This was definitely instant cast or quickened meta magic. It was only meta magic, and for mages that had reached the 5th rank, who didn't have 1 or 2 meta magics. But it was just that they normally couldn't be used casually. Using meta magic with a spell greatly increased the amount of mana consumed, and an ordinary mage couldn't support the cost. So they simply wouldn't be used except at critical moments. Someone like Mavamerlin, who had used 2 meta magics so quickly, was definitely an inexperienced newbie in the eyes of the 9th rank mage. If one used his trump card first and expended all their mana, what could they use to turn the situation around? Of course, he wasn't going to warn this youngster about his bad habit. He would just let this youth learn that the consequences of angering a 9th rank mage were too much for just anyone to handle. He began chanting his incantation. He didn't use any meta magic, and he didn't even further tax his mana whirlpool to hasten the casting speed. He wanted to knock this fellow down a few pegs with a display of strength, making him understand why the magic world was so hierarchical. Just 1 rank of difference would be a huge factor. It wasn't something that could be bridged with just 2 meta magics. The 9th rank mage was chanting the incantation for the Thunderstorm spell. It would take 20 seconds and a large amount of mana, making Thunderstorm one of the most powerful spells below the Great Mage realm. As the 9th rank mage chanted, the originally clear sky became covered with black clouds. Lightning started surging amidst the clouds and gathering together. The fierce, fluctuating electricity letting out screeching and crackling sounds. Thunderstorm's power was that frightening. Even if that spell had yet to be completed, just the scene of it materializing was enough to make people feel numb. But it all seemed to have no effect on Lin Yun. Lin Yun was still standing at the side of the rotten swamp with a relaxed expression, as if he hadn't noticed the sky being covered in black clouds. He raised his hands and another icicle flew out, just like before. No incantation, no gesture, and another archer was nailed to a tree. How could he still have mana? The 9th rank mage couldn't help frowning as he continued with his spell. Seems like I must hurry apostrophe. The 9th rank mage silently urged his mana whirlpool to speed up the completion of the spell. But as he did so, that young mage cast another icicle. Yet another archer was pinned to a tree. This was already the 3rd one. At that time, the 9th rank mage was a little regretful. If he had known earlier that this young mage had enough mana to support 4 uses of his meta magic, he wouldn't have cast his Thunderstorm normally. That way, he could have at least saved the 3rd archer from his fate. No good. Have to be faster. But Lin Yun was faster than him. Another icicle followed by 1 more, and another one, and another one. The 9th rank mage's Thunderstorm was still not ready when a rain of icicle spells pinned a dozen archers to trees or just the ground. Once they were all immobilized, Lin Yun also cast a frost spell. And just like when he handled Fario, he froze all the warriors in the rotten swamp. He had finished preparing the mighty Thunderstorm, but the 9th rank mage was staring at the scene foolishly, a blank expression on his face. Shock could be seen in his eyes, as he stood there in a daze, feeling alarm and dread as he looked at that young mage. That young mage let out about a dozen instant cast icicles, incapacitating all those archers. What kind of concept was that? The 9th rank mage had considered himself quite powerful, and could even cast a Thunderstorm in just 20 seconds, but instant casting a dozen icicles during that time, he didn't even dare to think about it. This was already something beyond what a mage could do. Whether it was the use of metamagic or normal casting, it was impossible. The 9th rank mage even felt that it was impossible for most great mages. Perhaps only those who had advanced to that realm for a long time, or those peak existences preparing to break through to the high mage realm could instant cast a dozen icicles in 20 seconds. But now, there was a young, 20-year-old mage that had managed to do so in front of him. He could feel that he had chosen to fight a battle that he never should have. For a mage with such powerful abilities, it would be really simple for him to kill a 9th rank mage. And let alone himself, the entire Viper Nest might not even be worth his time. What should I do? The thunderstorm was still ready and flickering with electricity. The black clouds covered the sky and thunder surged. He only needed to shout the last word and direct the spell to come down to raise everything within 10 meters. But the mage held back that last word. This foe's display of magic had driven him to the edge of despair. He didn't even have the intention to struggle now, he just stood there in a daze. Fear and helplessness filling his thoughts. He wasn't that powerful mage standing at the peak of his realm anymore, and instead looked like a lamb ready for slaughter. Follow me inside. After dealing with the dozen archers, Lin Yun didn't continue to make things difficult and beckoned the 9th rank mage to follow him into the building. Of course, there was no need to make things difficult. At this point, they were all scared out of their wits. The others weren't fools or lunatics, and they didn't dare to make any trouble. Even the loudly yelling Fario was now hiding on the side, not daring to even breathe. Lin Yun went through the door with the 9th rank mage in tow, before running into the anxious old butler. Young master, Fario brought many people over this time, did they make things difficult for you? Hearing the old butler's question, the 9th rank mage's heart nearly stopped. Grandpa, can't you see? Those warriors in the frozen swamp outside, those archers nailed to the trees, who is making things difficult for who? It's all right, I sent them away. Oh right, Uncle Pave, can you get us something to eat? I haven't eaten since I woke up. Of course, take a seat, I'll send someone to get you something to eat. After sending the old butler away, Lin Yun led the 9th rank mage to his study. Introduce yourself first. Yes, the 9th rank mage stood in place trembling with fear, afraid that he would somehow carelessly anger that powerful mage that had such frightening abilities. With Lin Yun questioning him, how could he dare to hide anything from him? I am Larry, one of the 4 vice leaders of the Viper Nest. I'm 40 this year, I reached the 9th rank 2 years ago. Okay, stop. The Lin Yun didn't have the time to listen to this guy being so long-winded. After learning about his identity, he directly cut in and asked, so, Larry, you brought so many people to surround my house, what was your intention? This. Oh right, don't even mention something like capturing a thief. I wouldn't dare. Larry was truly terrified. Those archers outside were still pinned down and perhaps dying. How could Larry dare to still insist that he was there to capture a thief? After a slight hesitation, he explained everything. Boss Saucy sent us, mainly to protect Fario. Just protect? Seeing Lin Yun's unpleasant expression, Larry suddenly heard his own heart beating faster. No, not just protection. Boss Saucy said that if needed, we could also use force to get the house. What does this Boss Saucy want to do with this house? I'm not too sure. You are not too sure? Yes, I really don't know. Larry was very anxious. He was afraid that Lin Yun would lose his patience and just punish him, so he blurted, Boss Saucy always worked like that, he rarely tells us the reason for anything. This time too, he only told us that whatever happened, we must seize this house. Must seize this house? Lin Yun nodded, but did not say anything else. After making an example of the dozen archers, Larry shouldn't be lying to him. In other words, he really didn't know what the secret of the house was. That answer somewhat surprised Lin Yun, as this 9th rank mage's position shouldn't be considered low. As one of the 4 vice leaders of the Viper Nest, he should be considered a core member. If even he didn't know, this suggested one thing. This house's secret was very shocking to the point that even a 9th rank mage didn't have the qualifications to know. Perhaps only great mages or high mages would be allowed to know about it. It seemed that Mather Merlin was far from knowing his father well enough. In the young Merlin's memories, Locke Merlin was only a simple businessman, and although monopolizing the alchemy business had earned him a huge amount of wealth, He hadn't reached the point where he could directly talk to a great mage or a high mage. But it now seemed that this wasn't the case. After Lin Yun thought for a bit, he waved his hand. "Okay, Mage Larry, you are free to go." Eh? Since he hadn't given a very good answer, Larry, who had been on edge for a long time, had all kinds of thoughts haunting his mind, wondering how that young mage would deal with him, maybe torture, more interrogation, murder, and so on. Such thoughts had made him go a bit weak in the knees. Suddenly hearing that he was free to go, Larry almost felt like he had misheard out of wishful thinking and fell into a daze for a long time, blinking in disbelief. "Did you just say that I was free to go?" "Yes, Mage Larry, you can leave. Remember to clean up the entrance on your way back." Chapter 24, Abyssal Magic Diamond. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. Yes, I swear I'll clean up everything at this time, let alone the entrance. Even if Lin Yun asked him to clean the entire Thousand Sails city, Larry would raise no objections and get straight to work. Larry hadn't dared to even think that this young mage would let him go so easily. No torture, no killing. He even didn't lose a single hair and was able to walk away free. This was such good luck. Thus, he quickly answered in the affirmative and then left the house. Moreover, after he freed the others, he had everyone help him quickly clean the entrance. After sending away the interlopers, Lin Yun sat in the study for a bit, waiting for his meal to be delivered. After casually finishing his meal, Lin Yun closed the doors and instructed that no one was to disturb him. He then started stirring his mana whirlpool to let out mage eyes one after the other. The mage eyes were condensed from mana, but they were different from ordinary spells. That mana wouldn't separate from the mage in control. After coming out, it would still be linked to the mana whirlpool, and thus, each mage eye would be like a pair of eyes for the caster, and everything they saw would appear in the mage's mind. But the average mage could at most use 3 to 5 mage eyes, not many could be like Lin Yun, releasing over a dozen mage eyes, and apparently without feeling the slightest bit of strain. Each mage eye needed extremely accurate control. That kind of control was even more difficult than what was faced when forming the mana whirlpool. Someone who had just advanced to become a mage wouldn't dare to try to control one, let alone many of them. Lin Yun spent 10 minutes to release over a dozen mage eyes and then controlled them to squeeze their way into various corners of the house. When Loch Merlin bought the house, he had spent more or less 100,000 gold. It could be considered a huge expenditure to the merchants of Thousand Sails City, and although it couldn't compare with the vast 10 hectares of the Monchai Manor, it still wasn't something that could be searched in a short amount of time. A dozen mage eyes sounded like a lot, but inside such a big house, it truly wasn't very conspicuous. Thus, Lin Yun closed the doors to his study and entered seclusion, because he knew that this could take a very long time. After the mage eyes flew out of the study, they all headed for various parts of the house. Some went to the living room, some went to the courtyard, some to the kitchen, some to the bedroom. Under Lin Yun's control, the dozen-plus mage eyes started thoroughly searching the entire house. Time slowly passed. The great amount of mana consumed made Lin Yun slowly pale from exertion. After an hour, Lin Yun picked up the first mana crystal and quickly drew the mana from within before he continued controlling the mage eyes. But this time, Lin Yun only lasted 40 minutes before he had to use the second mana crystal. Successively absorbing the mana from 2 mana crystals didn't improve Lin Yun's complexion, making it even worse. Mana crystals could indeed supply mana, but this kind of mana had impurities. An ordinary mage wouldn't dare to absorb it directly. Only Lin Yun, who once absorbed mana from the Netherstorm, would dare to do this. But even Lin Yun couldn't keep absorbing to continue his search. Lin Yun estimated that he would be able to absorb mana from 1 more mana crystal at most before he would have to stop the search and meditate for a while. Otherwise, the amount of impurities entering his body would cause some trouble for him. After 20 minutes, when Lin Yun was just about to pick up the 3rd mana crystal, one of the mage eyes flew into the study on the 2nd floor, before suddenly stopping as it saw something. "It's here," Lin Yun softly chanted, and the dozen mage eyes instantly returned and converted back into pure mana before blending into Lin Yun's mana whirlpool. At the same time, Lin Yun stood up and pushed open the door that had been closed for about 2 hours. before heading for a staircase that led to the second floor. The study on the second floor was the place that Lochmerlin had used for work. Because it involved many business secrets, he normally hadn't allowed anyone inside. Even his only son, Mather Merlin, had only been inside a sparse number of times. He hadn't thought much of it before, but now, he felt like there was most likely something about this study. After Lin Yun reached the study, he instantly glanced at the bookshelf in the rear. He noticed the sixth book on the third row. It seemed no different from others at first glance, but to Lin Yun, who lived in a library for a long time, there was a huge problem with that book. There were a lot of books on the bookshelf, but this one book had a lot more wear on its cover. Some people might assume that the damage had come from the book being read too many times. Was Lochmerlin not allowed to like books, and this one in particular? Indeed, this could have been an acceptable explanation. The issue was that this book's pages were actually still brand new. How could Lochmerlin read a book without opening the pages? If Lin Yun couldn't notice such a big problem while using magical perception, then his life in the library could be considered to have failed him here. Lin Yun walked to the bookshelf and reached out to see if he could manipulate that book. Sure enough, he heard a cackle echo out. Something had been opened, a secret door, as expected. Lin Yun tried pushing the bookshelf, and surprisingly, the bookshelf was pushed back with a light touch, exposing a tunnel behind it. Lin Yun looked inside and saw that it was very long and very dark. He couldn't tell where this tunnel led. Furthermore, there were some magic fluctuations inside. These kinds of fluctuations weren't exactly strong, but they seemed extremely heavy and had a powerful sealing nature. Lin Yun guessed that this should be an alchemy array for suppressing or sealing something. As for the details, he would have to go and see first. Lin Yun casually used a light spell and made the bright and gentle ball of light float half a meter in front of him. He followed it and entered the dark tunnel. Lin Yun walked for about 5 minutes in the gloomy tunnel before reaching the end. At the end of the tunnel was a tightly shut stone door, and the fluctuations he felt before came from behind that door. Lin Yun tried to push that stone door open, but it didn't move at all. He looked around, but there was nothing similar to the mechanism on the bookshelf. Lin Yun couldn't help scratching his head as he thought, "Don't tell me a key is needed. That doesn't seem right. There is not even a small crack on that stone door, let alone a keyhole." This is apostrophe. Just as Lin Yun was considering whether or not he should just force his way through, he suddenly noticed that there seemed to be some strange vein patterns on top of the stone door. Those patterns were quite faint and inconspicuous, especially in the darkness of the tunnel. Lin Yun originally thought they were just decorative designs on the door, but after looking at them carefully, he found out that this wasn't the case. It's actually the Nessa language. Before Nosant's third era, there had been two huge dynasties. One was the Yashan dynasty that had already disappeared in the River of Time. It was said that this was a dynasty that had been established from divine magic. Unfortunately, it was far too ancient an era, and the history couldn't be verified. And what followed was the Nessa dynasty. The Nessa dynasty was formed through the joint rule of the dragons and elves. It was said that modern magic had been born in that era, and the two powerful races ruled Nosant for several millennia. It then slowly collapsed due to endless internal friction, to the point that for many years since then, very few people were able to find vestiges of the Nessa dynasty. But there had been one thing from then that was still passed down: the Nessa language. This was a mix of Draconic and Elvish. It was concise and accurate, and many mages considered it the most perfect language for magic. Even countless years later, at the peak of the magic civilization, the Nessa language was one of the compulsory fields of knowledge that mages had to learn. Many advanced spells had to be written in Nessa runes. Some profound fields of magic knowledge were even described only with Nessa runes because the descriptions would become long, tedious, and very complicated. Even simple reading would be very convoluted. But the Nessa language had been very widespread. Well, that was after the plain colonies had been established. Those who mastered the Nessa language were the mages at the top, archmages at least. So, who left the Nessa runes on the stone door? Lin Yun looked over the rest of the door for a while but didn't find anything else. So he started studying Nessa runes on the door. This was quite easy for Lin Yun, and he only needed 10 minutes to decipher the Nessa runes on the stone door. Simply put, it was a puzzle. a puzzle using Nessa runes. Everything was very simple after that. Lin Yun just spoke the answer to the riddle in the Nessa language. The shut door immediately confirmed the answer and opened. Damn, Lin Yun's eyes were nearly blinded when the door opened. 3 red diamonds were embedded in the stone wall, emitting a dazzling light that pierced into the darkness that had been surrounding him, and they were filling the air with fierce magic fluctuations, making it difficult to breathe. Those were abyssal magic diamonds. It was rumored that the eyes of a demon would transform into those after death. Each one had an impressive amount of mana. Every mage would yearn for such a valuable treasure, even in this era that was so abundant in resources. The abyssal magic diamond could be described as a priceless treasure. If one appeared on the market, it would make countless mages go crazy, and even those high mages would pay any price for them. With huge amounts of pure mana and shocking mana conductivity, the abyssal magic diamond was one of the best mana sources, and one of the easiest to use. Whether it was for direct mana absorption, or for operating an alchemy array, it could remove the step transforming the mana impurities. Because its mana was the purest, there was simply no need to worry about impurities. Chapter 25, Planar Path. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. And all this was just with a raw abyssal magic diamond that had been roughly treated. If one fell into the hands of a great alchemist, the radiance of the abyssal magic diamond would really blossom. Those peak alchemists could even use abyssal magic diamonds to craft spiritual magic tools. Spiritual level, what kind of concept was that? The best magic tools circulating on the market were mostly superior level, yet the cheapest of those would be bought for over 10,000 gold. And above the superior level, there were still the excellent and inheritance levels. It was the spiritual level that many great alchemists spent their entire lives pursuing, the goal of creating a spiritual magic tool. The spiritual level, as the name implied, would give the items spirituality. Those magic tools weren't just pieces of equipment anymore. They were connected with their owner's blood, and their power could even be compared to that of a high mage. In other words, having a spiritual magic tool was equivalent to having a high mage aid you in battle. And now, there were as many as 3 abyssal magic diamonds in front of Lin Yun. This was simply unthinkable. If these 3 abyssal magic diamonds were brought out into the public eye, all the alchemists of Thousand Sails City might go completely crazy. Hold on, what's that? Just as Lin Yun was getting dazzled by his find, Lin Yun suddenly noticed some runes carved in between the 3 abyssal magic diamonds. Lin Yun studied the stone wall for a bit and roughly understood what was going on. This was an alchemy array built upon 6 runes. The specific effect was to extract mana from the 3 abyssal magic diamonds. But things were more complicated when he followed those runes down. There was another alchemy array under the 3 abyssal magic diamonds, but the structure of this array was 100 times more complicated than the previous one, and it was 100 times more expensive, too. Each rune was written in void ink, while a few of the mana circuits even used soul-burning ink. Not to mention the over 20 magic nodes. Even Lin Yun could barely distinguish them from one another. It seemed to him that the effect of this alchemy array was to use the abyssal magic diamond's mana to keep the space stable. Lin Yun looked back at those 3 abyssal magic diamonds, suddenly realizing something. No wonder the questions in Lin Yun's mind got their answer upon recognizing this alchemy array. Lin Yun didn't need to study the array any further to know that behind these 3 abyssal magic diamonds on the stone wall was a path. A planar path. The so-called planar path was a passage between planes. In fact, as early as the 3rd dynasty, some people had suggested that Noscent wasn't the only world in the boundless universe. But those theories had no physical evidence to back them up at the time. That was the case up until the end of the 3rd era, when some mages brought it up again and tried to prove the existence of different planes. In the last 100 years of the 3rd dynasty, the Crimson Tower finally opened a planar path. Afterwards, there was nothing afterwards. The powerful group of mages from the Crimson Tower set foot on the planar path, but they never returned. The entire Crimson Tower fell apart overnight and finally died out due to endless power struggles created by the void left behind. After that, speaking of planar paths was a taboo topic for a long time. Up until the current times, Many years later, all kinds of magic research would progress day after day, mages would grow more powerful, and ambitions would keep rising, especially when some lucky guy brought back all kinds of rare resources from another plane. Plane colonization would become something the mages of this era would jointly work on. Each plane hidden behind those planar paths would become gold mines in the eyes of the mages, but only a few planar paths were known, and they were mostly in the hands of Nocent's most powerful forces. Trying to gain control of one would be courting death. Thus, each time a new planar path appeared, countless forces would fight over it because to them, a new planar path meant a new opportunity for endless wealth. They were willing to pay an unimaginable price for the sake of a new planar path. At that time, why had Lin Yun agreed to take over the flashing gold chamber of commerce when he figured out which era of Nocent's history he was in? It was because Lin Yun wanted to establish his own planar path by taking advantage of the power of his flashing gold chamber of commerce. To a mage, there was nothing more enticing than a private plane. That wasn't just an opportunity to get endless wealth. Completely controlling a private plane would allow a mage's starting point to be elevated, letting them rise above all livings. It was the power of an entire plane. This was also why, at the peak of Nocent's magic civilization, the mages close to being omnipotent would still endlessly campaign for the chance to get a plane of their own. And Lin Yun had ended up finding an unknown planar path hidden inside his own house. Seems like these 3 abyssal magic diamonds can't be moved. Despite this painful fact, compared to a whole plane, 3 abyssal magic diamonds couldn't compare. Lin Yun was almost certain that these 3 abyssal magic diamonds had been brought back from the other plane by Loch Merlin. In Nocent, the value of the abyssal magic diamonds was inestimable, but they might be everywhere in some other plane. Lin Yun stopped thinking about the abyssal magic diamonds and started focusing on the alchemy array on the stone wall. The level of that array was very high. Lin Yun estimated that an average great alchemist would be unable to reach this level of achievement. It was most likely the work of a peak great alchemist, or even a master alchemist. In the last 20 years, Lin Yun had mostly just tried to survive, while the remaining time was spent on trying to improve his knowledge of magic. He had only hastily read through the alchemy books, since materials were so scarce. Besides filling his brains with alchemy knowledge, the times he had actually crafted something from them could be counted on his fingers. Something like this master-level alchemy array was very difficult for Lin Yun to decipher. After about half an hour, Lin Yun's gaze moved away from the stone wall. Sure enough, it really is a master alchemist. After analyzing the structure of the alchemy array, Lin Yun was certain of it. That array was definitely the work of a master alchemist. But fortunately, that master alchemist didn't place any obstacles on that alchemy array to prevent others from analyzing it, maybe due to confidence, or just on a whim. Thus, given enough time, Lin Yun managed to completely crack the runes. When Lin Yun whispered the opening Nessa runes, the 3 abyssal magic diamonds suddenly blossomed with a dazzling radiance. In that instant, the entire room shone red, and it could clearly be seen among those red lights that the space around him was starting to distort. The fierce magic fluctuations were raging in the hidden chamber. That kind of berserk energy felt literally tangible, and even the air seemed to shudder. At the same time, the 3 abyssal magic diamonds began to grow ever more dazzling. The array was operating frantically, trying its best to suppress these berserk magic fluctuations. Opening a path to another plane was tantamount to ripping space apart. If just a hint of power leaked out, it wasn't something a small hidden chamber like this could bear. If not for the master level array suppressing it, let alone the small room, even someone on the level of a 9th rank mage like Lin Yun might be instantly destroyed. With these 2 destructive forces fighting each other and mutually suppressing each other, the surrounding space was distorted to the extreme and a black crack appeared, gradually expanding. This was a planar path. Lin Yun didn't hesitate and immediately rushed in. Time was of the essence. Although the 3 abyssal magic diamonds were invaluable, they were far from enough to maintain a planar path continuously. This was equivalent to forcibly connecting 2 different planes, so the power requirement could only be described as frightening. Lin Yun estimated that this planar path would last at most 30 minutes. If he didn't return within the 30 minutes, he would be stuck in that unknown plane forever. There was nothing he could do about it, as Lin Yun wasn't one of those mages at the peak of Gnoscent magic civilization. They could pass through planes freely by that point, but Lin Yun didn't have that skill. When Lin Yun rushed into the planar path, he felt a blur before his eyes. It was followed by the world changing right before his eyes. His surroundings were no longer the narrow hidden chamber, instead being replaced by a vast and endless black land. The sky was dark, and besides a dark red crescent moon, there was not a single trace of light. A thick, putrid smell filled the air, giving the feeling like the entire world was rotten. What is this place? Lin Yun was vigilantly checking his surroundings while his brain was quickly sifting through his memories. He had heard of such a plane before, but before he could remember, a small sound came from his feet, like a snake was moving through the grass. Chapter 26, Bone Plane. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. What the Lin Yun was startled when he heard that strange sound and instantly moved back, a small, bright flame appearing at his fingertips. As the flame lit up the area, Lin Yun saw that at the place he had been standing, a skeleton was pushing its way out of the ground. The skeleton's body was covered in black mud and it was holding a rusted scimitar, and two phosphorescent flames flickered within its empty sockets. An undead life form. Lin Yun was horrified by the revelation. This was clearly a lowly skeleton warrior, the lowest life form amongst the undead. How come my luck is so good? I casually found a planar path, but it ended up leading to the famous undead plane. Such a cruel joke apostrophe. Even at the peak of the magic civilization, mages wouldn't rashly set foot in the undead plane. That place was just too dangerous, and even powerful mages could fall there. Endless swarms of the undead. They had unlimited stamina and did not fear death or destruction, making the undead plane one of the most difficult planes to conquer. Lin Yun once read a note clearly saying that during the entire length of the plane colonization era, only 3 people truly conquered the undead plane. The plane colonization era lasted for 10,000 years. So who knew how many outstanding mages appeared during that period? But only 3 of them managed to conquer the undead plane. What should I do? Lin Yun felt a bit faint. This wasn't a joke, as the renowned undead plane simply wasn't a place that a 9th rank mage like him could set foot in. Let alone a 9th rank mage, even a high mage, even an archmage would be courting death by stepping into the undead plane. I have to quickly leave this place. If I wait until more of the undead are alarmed, I won't be able to leave even if I want to. With this in mind, Lin Yun chanted something, and the small flame at his fingertip immediately turned into a blaze, which turned into a fire arrow and flew at the skeleton warrior. At the same time, Lin Yun hurriedly retreated and kept chanting line after line, matching these words with various gestures. The mana fluctuations in the surroundings became fiercer. The fire arrow struck the skeleton warrior's body, exploding with a bang, and sending sparks and white bone fragments scattering from the impact point. The entire left arm of the skeleton warrior had exploded. That kind of injury would be enough to seriously harm any ordinary combatant and seriously incapacitate them. But it was far from enough for an undead. After receiving the fire arrow attack, the skeleton warrior was only staggered a bit. And then, as if it hadn't been affected at all, it got up and lifted its rusted scimitar once again before charging at the retreating Lin Yun. This was the frightening advantage of the undead. They were very troublesome to kill. Losing a hand or a leg was a much less significant loss for them. Besides reducing mobility and effectiveness, they still would be able to fight. But Lin Yun had already anticipated that. After shooting out the fire arrow, he didn't stop chanting, and just as the skeleton warrior was raising its weapon, Lin Yun's second spell was cast. Thunder Hammer. A large hammer with electricity surging all over it and made of flickering gold light appeared out of nowhere in front of the skeleton warrior before smashing down, emitting a clap of thunder. A deep fracture appeared on the skeleton warrior's sternum, followed by a lot of low sounds that grew until a sharp crack rang out. The skeleton warrior wasn't able to scream, but the fires in those empty eye sockets were raging as the scimitar in its hand still began to swing down. But what awaited it was a second thunder hammer. Another bang echoed, and this thunder hammer completely smashed the skeleton warrior's skull, extinguishing the fires in the eye sockets in that instant. The scimitar fell to the ground with a clang along with the bones of the skeleton warrior. Lin Yun let out a sigh of relief. He skillfully rummaged through the skeleton warrior's skull while carefully checking his surroundings, preparing to use the planar path to return to Noscent at any time. Soon, Lin Yun found a black undead essence from the remains of the skeleton warrior. This was what remained after the soul fire stopped burning. It contained a large amount of death energy and was an extremely good material to add to a magic weapon. It would add death energy to each attack, causing the enemy to have all kinds of negative thoughts, and against a foe with less resistance, these negative thoughts could make the difference between victory and defeat. This kind of undead essence could reach a price similar to that of an excellent magic tool if put on the market. Not bad luck. The skeleton warrior's soul fire was quite weak, so it was very improbable for it to become an undead essence after it was destroyed. It was truly lucky for Lin Yun to get one from this. But even if his luck wasn't bad here, Lin Yun was still in a terrible mood. After all, each planar path gave the opportunity to attain endless wealth. At the peak of the magic civilization, the powerful mages were mostly relying on planar paths to make their marks on the world before setting foot at the peak of Noscent. Unfortunately, this planar path led to the famous undead plane. But giving up completely was beyond Lin Yun. Though, Lin Yun had no plans to consider profiting from this plane for a long time. He was lucky this time. He only met one skeleton warrior and got an undead essence from it. But who would guarantee that he would be as lucky next time, when he might run into 10,000 of them? What if he met a lich? That was a frightening existence on the level of an archmage. Moreover, such an existence wasn't that rare in the undead plane. In a plane where even black dragons could be found in a large group, what were a few dozen or even 100 liches? Hold on. After remembering all kinds of things about the undead plane, Lin Yun suddenly thought of an issue. So, why was there only one skeleton warrior? It's rumored that the undead plane is teeming with endless undead. There should be a sea of skeleton warriors here. How could I have met just one skeleton warrior after such a long time? This isn't logical apostrophe. Is it possible that this isn't actually the undead plane? This possibility made Lin Yun's hand shake. Yes or no? The difference was too huge. One side had the chance for endless wealth while the other side had nothing but hardships. Lin Yun made a risky decision for this. He interrupted his chant to activate the runes that would let him return, and instead chanted the Magi spell. 3 mages' eyes blended into the night one after the other as they stuck close to the ground while moving at a very fast speed. From what the Magi's showed him, Lin Yun could see that there really weren't any more undead creatures on the entire Black Wasteland. This discovery made Lin Yun's breathing quicken. But after thinking about it, he still had some reservations, so he cast Detect Undead. This time, Lin Yun felt them. There truly weren't any more of them across the wasteland, but they were sleeping underground. If they weren't alarmed, they might not wake up for 8 to 10 years. Lin Yun was still surprised to discover that among all the undead life forms under the ground, the most powerful was only a bone devil. It had to be known that the strength of a bone devil was at most equivalent to a peak great mage. This didn't make much sense. Across such a huge Black Wasteland, how could the most powerful life form be a mere bone devil? After all, in the undead plane, banshees and liches filled the place. A mere bone devil, how could it occupy such a huge territory? At this time, Lin Yun was almost certain that this place was most definitely not the undead plane. There weren't enough undead here for that to be the case, and they were also too weak. Something as weak as a bone devil was the strongest in this area. In the undead plane, those mages of the peak era should not even be mentioned. But it wasn't the undead plane, so where was this? The undead were here. There was a dark red crescent moon. The air was filled with death energy, and it had the same smell as the undead plane. All these similarities. The bone plane. With all these clues, Lin Yun patted his head before finally remembering. That's right, this must be the bone plane, a plane with characteristics very similar to those of the undead plane, but its power was countless times lower. This was too different for Lin Yun. In that spacious decayed library, There had been countless documents about the plane colonization era, and Lin Yun had read some of those when feeling bored, even the more insignificant ones. The bone plane had been discovered somewhere in the middle of the plane colonization era. 3 young mages from the ivory tower had accidentally obtained the coordinates of the bone plane during an experiment, so they used the coordinates to create a brand new planar path and then completely conquered the bone plane within 3 months. That's right, just 3 months. Chapter 27, Nether Iron. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. It was most likely the fastest and most cost-efficient plane to conquer in the entire plane colonization era. The young mages were using a worn-out magic battleship, yet they only needed 3 months to conquer the entire plane. That wasn't too surprising, since the level of the bone plane was really too low. The most powerful creature though was only a bone dragon. The worn-out magic battleship had erased the bone dragon from existence with just one salvo. The 3 young mages had relied on their miraculous conquest of that plane to obtain the favor of the higher-ups of the ivory tower and truly become core mages of that powerful force. After several decades of efforts, they successfully entered the Council of the Ivory Tower and became major figures there. There were plenty of such stories in that era, but what happened after the story was the most important part. Lin Yun remembered that after the Ivory Tower obtained the bone plane, it truly rose as one of the 7 major forces of Nocent. It not only controlled the Dark Highland for a millennium, but one heaven rank mage came from it, Bane. Moreover, Bane also had an extraordinary magic tool, the renowned Book of Death. Despite the fact that the Ivory Tower never revealed the reason for their sudden rise, astute observers could guess that the sudden emergence of the Ivory Tower, which had been suppressed by the Caucasus Council for several millennia, was definitely related to the discovery of the bone plane by the 3 young mages. It was a public secret at the time. Following the rise of the Ivory Tower, the bounty of the bone plane gradually spread throughout Nocent. Countless people were eyeing that fertile, black land. The Ivory Tower left to Mage Core there and would execute large numbers of trespassers every day, but under the temptation of the possibility for attaining great profits, there would still be countless waves of such people intruding all the time. This situation continued up until Nocent's mana was exhausted, the powerful mages fell one after the other, and the rising Ivory Tower vanished. As for that fertile, black land, it finally welcomed a long-lost calm. But all of this had yet to happen. The 3 young mages stumbled upon the coordinates of this plane over 10,000 years later. But Lin Yun had already set foot on this fertile plane through Loch Merlin's planar path, which meant that perhaps the Ivory Tower would not rule the Dark Highland for over a millennium, and Heaven Mage Bane wouldn't have the extraordinary magic tool, the Book of Death. But for Lin Yun, finding the bone plane so early in the timeline came with a serious problem. The conquest would be extremely difficult. When those 3 mages from the Ivory Tower had discovered the bone plane, they had only been able to conquer it within 3 months because they had a magic battleship. Even if it was worn out, it was still a magic battleship. By relying on its power, the 3 young mages were able to easily conquer the bone plane, taking out the most powerful inhabitant in just one salvo. But Lin Yun couldn't do so, as the plane colonization era had just started, and although the magic battleships had already been created, they were far from having their future destructive power. Besides, the current magic battleships were only in the hands of a few of the most powerful forces. Moreover, even if these battleships were as strong now as they eventually would be in the future, they wouldn't fall into Lin Yun's hands. Lin Yun could only rely on himself. But the good news was that Lin Yun had a lot of time. If everything followed the original course of history, then it would only be over 10,000 years later that the young mages of the Ivory Tower would incidentally find the coordinates of the bone plane. Lin Yun should still have enough time to increase his strength. When Lin Yun reached the point of being able to contend against a bone dragon, the conquest of the bone plane would naturally follow. And before becoming strong enough, Lin Yun could only maintain a low profile. The bone plane wasn't something that was impossible for him to explore, but once there, he would have to always remain vigilant. This fertile land was quite fraught with danger for the current Lin Yun. If more than 10 skeleton warriors appeared at the same time, Lin Yun would struggle to keep up. not to mention the sleeping bone devil. That was an existence that approached the high mage level. For someone like Lin Yun who had the power of a 9th rank mage, if he bumped into it, his only option would be to flee. Thus, even if the black soil beneath his feet seemed boundless, the area that Lin Yun could explore was only that small plot beside the planar path. Only there would he still be mostly safe. If he found something that he couldn't deal with, he could quickly flee. Lin Yun was exploring this very area at the moment. In a dozen minutes or so, Lin Yun dealt with over 20 skeleton warriors, which brought him 4 undead essences. Tsitsi. It truly is a fertile land. Finding 4 undead essences was tantamount to having 4 excellent magic tools, and it only took him a bit over 10 minutes to get them. Lin Yun's time was already running out. The 3 abyssal magic diamonds making up the alchemy array could maintain the planar path for about half an hour. After dealing with those skeleton warriors, Lin Yun felt like he should head back, as he wanted to have a safety margin. He could only wait for next time if he wanted to do this again. Lin Yun didn't delay and put 4 undead essences into his pocket and started chanting the incantation to leave. But he suddenly saw a bright flash 100 meters away from him. Lin Yun's curiosity was immediately piqued. This was the Bone Plain, a world made of black soil and ghastly bones. It was definitely unusual for a light to flare out like that. Lin Yun immediately cancelled the incantation to open the exit and sent a magi over, keeping it close to the black soil. Lin Yun became stupefied. Through the magi, Lin Yun could clearly see numerous skeleton warriors surrounding that flicker, hundreds of them at the very least. Numerous flaming eyes, and a forest of bones. It gave them an even more ghastly feeling. And the thing that they were all surrounding was a vein of nether iron that was several hundred meters long. At first glance, it looked like a giant, hibernating black python emitting a dense aura of death. There was a layer of hazy fog covering it, which covered the bloody moonlight as well as Lin Yun's line of sight, to the point that even when he was only a few hundred meters away, Lin Yun hadn't seen the vein of nether iron. Up until now, when Lin Yun accidentally saw that bit of flickering light, leaving him completely shocked. A nether iron vein that was several hundred meters long and completely exposed to the surface. No one would believe it if word of this got out. Normally, a nether iron vein could only be found several dozen meters below the ground, and even then, there would only be a few pieces here and there. Lin Yun had never heard of a vein that was hundreds of meters long. This was too frightening. After all, magic weapons forged with nether iron would naturally have the death frost power. If one was put on the market, it would sell for tens of thousands of gold. Moreover, nether iron would often be accompanied by all kinds of precious magic gems. These magic gems were worth even more than the nether iron itself. The abyssal magic diamond was one of those. Such a long nether iron vein, it should be enough to gear up 10,000 people. After seeing everything through the magi, Lin Yun wasn't in a hurry to approach. He instead crept close to a rock and carefully concealed himself. There were a couple hundred skeleton warriors next to the iron vein. If he alarmed them, he wouldn't even know how he died. Not to mention the dormant bone devil, which definitely wouldn't be very hospitable. Pushing through directly was out of the question. Hundreds of skeleton warriors and a bone devil that can wake up at any time. He would need the strength of a high mage at the very least before fighting them, but he was just a 9th rank mage. Going in would simply be throwing his life away. But, of course, it didn't mean that there was nothing he could do. Lin Yun hid behind the rock and thought about it while letting out another magi. But this time, after this magi flew near the nether iron vein, Lin Yun not only gave up control of it, but he also poured a large amount of mana into it, making that magi quite strange. It had definitely been separated from Lin Yun's direct control, but thanks to the support of the residual mana, it could stay there for a long time. Of course, this kind of existence didn't have much meaning, because Lin Yun could no longer look through the magi, as their connection had been severed. The magi floating above the nether iron mine was actually a target. Its only effect was to use its faint light for positioning. But this was exactly what Lin Yun needed. After planting the magi, Lin Yun got in front of the rock and started casting a long and tedious incantation. As his mana whirlpool rotated, a fireball left Lin Yun's hand and flew out. The fireball left a long, flaming trail as it flew several hundred meters forward before arriving above that vein of nether iron in a blink. At almost the same time, Lin Yun chanted a final word. A bang followed, echoing loudly, as the huge fireball exploded above the nether iron vein, creating a blazing inferno in the sky. In an instant, the area below turned into a sea of fire. Chapter 28, Elemental Incarnation. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. The rain of fire fell onto the black soil. It felt as if a pan of oil had caught fire, and in a few moments, that sea of fire spread for 100 meters, waking all of the slumbering skeleton warriors. Their soul fires were throbbing blankly as they ran around through the inferno in complete confusion. This was the 9th rank spell, Fire Rain. Among the mage rank spells, it was only a bit inferior to Thunderstorm, but it was a lot more effective than Thunderstorm against the undead. The large group of skeleton warriors was just instinctively running around, so how could they manage to avoid this vast sea of fire? In a short time, dozens of skeletons fell, charred to cinders. If it had been earlier, Lin Yun would be feeling very happy. Burning up more than a dozen skeleton warriors meant that he would get several undead essences. But Lin Yun wasn't happy right now. He hadn't dared to use a spell like Fire Rain before because he was worried that it would create too big of a commotion and lead to him being surrounded by the undead that were drawn to the ruckus. But Lin Yun couldn't hold off at this time. A vein of nether iron that was several hundred meters long. Even the most powerful forces at the peak of the magic civilization some 10,000 years later would covet, let alone now. Putting aside whether Lin Yun could mine anything from it now, as long as he was able to take advantage of the chaos to grab some magic gems from the vein, it would be worth it. As for whether he would alarm a lot of skeleton warriors, or even the bone devil that was sleeping underground, Lin Yun no more cared about it. With such a shocking nether iron vein spread in front of him, if he didn't grab himself a souvenir, Lin Yun wouldn't be able to forgive himself. Even if it was only a magic gem, its value would be no less than 100,000 gold. That would push the development of the Gilded Rose to a whole new level, at the very least equal to how it had been back when the old butler was really busy taking care of it, half a year ago. It would be even better if he got a good one, like an Abyssal Magic Diamond. If he had another Abyssal Magic Diamond, Lin Yun would be able to transform the Master Rank Alchemy Array, letting him keep the planar path open for at least an hour at a time. Increasing the time he could stay in the bone plane by half an hour wouldn't just increase the amount of undead essence that he could gather, it meant that Lin Yun could expand his range of activities and head for the depths of the bone plane to hunt higher level undeads and obtain all kinds of precious natural resources. All this was built upon the amount of time that he could remain here. Have to be fast. Casting the Magi and the Fire Rain took him about 1 minute. But Lin Yun's remaining time in the bone plane was already lacking. Moreover, as that sea of fire frantically spread, Lin Yun could feel the earth under his feet trembling, and a deep roar could be heard from the depths of the black wasteland. Lin Yun guessed that the Bone Devil had most likely been roused by the commotion. He had to act before the Bone Devil appeared, or else he would have to face an opponent with power on the level of a high mage ahead of time. At the same time that the deep roar echoed, Lin Yun clung close to the rock. He didn't chant or cast any spells. He only urged his mana whirlpool and continuously moved it at extreme speed, constantly pushing it towards the limit. In a short 10 seconds, Lin Yun's mana was in a boiling state. Immediately after, the only thing that could be seen was a bright and fierce flame. Lin Yun's body burst into flame and instantly flew several hundred meters before reaching the center of the sea of fire. When a mage shattered their mana whirlpool, they would reach Great Mage Realm and gain the ability to completely fuse with their mana. Moreover, their power would increase tenfold and they would be able to cast spells as they pleased. And most importantly, upon becoming a great mage, they could potentially grasp a frightening magical ability known as Elemental Incarnation. It would completely transform their body into a particular element, making them immune to almost all physical attacks and gaining the properties of the element that they embodied. But that powerful ability could only be sustained for a short time. Even a peak great mage would only be able to sustain it for a minute. And Lin Yun's time was much shorter. Lin Yun was still not a great mage right now, So what he was displaying wasn't a genuine elemental incarnation. That bright mass of fire had been created by using Lin Yun's mana control that transcended the limits of the era to forcibly imitate the mana circulation used during elemental incarnation. This would be practically impossible for anyone else of this time. This was a spell that surpassed the limits, and the duration of the spell would be even shorter than what an average great mage could sustain. Lin Yun estimated that he could last 10 seconds at most. If he couldn't accomplish everything within 10 seconds, then after the elemental incarnation disappeared, he would not only have to face a furious Bone Devil, but would also have to face the weakness that would ensue due to overdrafting his mana. Thus, when Lin Yun was about to reach the center of the Sea of Fire, he consecutively cast 5 flame bursts. The elemental incarnation came with instant fire system spells. Lin Yun cast these flame bursts one by one with no interruption in between. Only successive explosions could be heard echoing. A hole over a dozen meters long appeared in the nether iron vein. Pieces of ores carrying a faint, black light scattered around, and each of them was of high quality and could sell for several thousand gold coins. But Lin Yun didn't even look at them, instead pouncing on a few flickering lights. His speed while having elemental incarnation active was unfathomably high, and since Lin Yun was forcibly rotating his mana, he was even faster. A dazzling flame could be seen speeding through the Sea of Fire. The lights that had yet to fall had already been collected by Lin Yun. At the same time, the earth shook fiercely under his feet. It was followed by a deafening roar as a frightening, bony monster came out of the ground. It was 4 to 5 meters tall and was surrounded by countless faint phosphorescent lights, and in the center of its skull was a raging soul fire the size of a fist. Power strong enough to contend against that of a high mage was emitted, and the countless skeleton warriors within the Sea of Fire lowered their heads. Even if they were burnt to ashes in the inferno, none of the skeleton warriors dared to move. The chaotic scene instantly stabilized when the Bone Devil appeared. After settling the disturbance of the skeleton warriors, the Bone Devil let out another deep roar, and after a fierce mana fluctuation, a few brilliant beams shot out. The target was Lin Yun, who was grabbing those few flickering lights. The Bone Devil's dark fire bullet was something that even a high mage would be wary of. How could Lin Yun dare to take it head on even if he had elemental incarnation active? Just as the Bone Devil shot those spells, Lin Yun had already let off a flame flash. This time, the importance of the fire rain was shown. The Sea of Fire, which had already spread to several hundred meters, had already become Lin Yun's best escape tool. Lin Yun seemed like a fish in water as he used Flame Flash. Before the dark fire bullets had even arrived, Lin Yun had already used Flame Flash 3 times and escaped to the edge of the Sea of Fire. It was immediately followed by Lin Yun using the earlier incantation, making the planar path to Nocent appear once again. Lin Yun took 2 steps onto the planar path and looked back at the black wasteland from within the distorted space. The next trip here would be a month later at the very least. Proceeding along the path, Lin Yun stepped once more into Nocent. The 3 abyssal magic diamond became dark after exhausting their mana. They looked like 3 stones no longer had any of the radiance associated with abyssal magic diamonds. The basement had fallen into darkness once more. 3 is too few. Lin Yun shook his head. The amount of mana needed for a master rank alchemy array was huge. 3 abyssal magic diamonds could only be considered the lowest number that would work. Each time the mana was exhausted, the array would need at least a month to recover. In other words, Lin Yun would be able to enter the bone plane again after a month, but he would only be able to stay there for half an hour. Too annoying. 30 minutes really wasn't long enough for Lin Yun. This wasn't just a matter of profit. This related to Lin Yun's plan. If this matter could be settled, then Lin Yun might very possibly obtain an extraordinary magic tool. That's right, Heaven rank Mage Bane's extraordinary magic tool, the Book of Death. He only needed time. 30 minutes was far from enough, and Lin Yun estimated that if he wanted to settle this matter, he would need at least 3 days. And that was if nothing at all went wrong. So he had to set aside 4 days to be safe. Such a long time definitely wasn't something that a small handful of abyssal magic diamonds could satisfy. Without hundreds of abyssal magic diamonds, it would be just a dream. The difference is too great. Lin Yun felt what was in his pocket. In addition to the 10 undead essences, there were 6 magic gems that he had snatched from the nether iron vein. The 10 undead essences were set aside by Lin Yun. The only use for those was to add them to magic weapons. Their price wouldn't change too much, so it would be appropriate to let the old butler deal with them. Then, Lin Yun took out the 6 magic gems one after the other. Lin Yun was already pleasantly surprised when he pulled out the first magic gem. This was a high-quality dark fire gem. It had the properties of fire and poison. It was typically used in embedding, whether it was on a weapon or a piece of jewelry. Once embedded, the dark fire gem would have shocking destructive power that didn't depend on the strength of the user. Even in the hands of a 3-year-old child, it could kill 10 strong, robust men like Jimmy. The price of the dark fire gem was definitely going to be very high. Chapter 29, No Hurry. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. But the power within the dark fire gem was limited, and even a brilliant alchemist couldn't make it reach spiritual level. It seemed inferior to the abyssal magic diamond, but if these two were put on the market at the same time, the dark fire gem would ultimately get a higher price. This was a certainty. There was no requirement for the user, making it way too overpowered at lower levels. Every major family would spare nothing to nurture their own heirs. Mason of the Monchai family was a good example of that. In order to let him become a true mage, the Monchai family had spent several 100,000 gold. If they spent several 100,000 gold just to make him into a mage, how much would the Monchai family be willing to pay for an excellent magic tool that completely lacked usage requirements? After all, a mage wielding an excellent magic tool could face some weaker great mages. Good luck. Lin Yun smiled happily. With just this one dark fire gem, this trip could be considered a great success. Although it couldn't be used to improve the planar path, putting it on the market wasn't bad either. He should earn at least 500,000 gold from its sale, and that was a conservative estimate. Even if he used the profits to buy an abyssal magic diamond, it would leave him plenty of money. Lin Yun put the dark fire gem on the table and fished out 3 more magic gems from his pocket. But there wasn't any pleasant surprise this time. Despite them being magic gems of fairly high quality, there was still a huge gap compared to the price of the dark fire gem. The best of those was an elemental amber, which contained a very small amount of mana itself. But it still was one of the best mana vessels, and it could store a large amount of mana from external sources. It could even store a high mage spell. After thinking for a bit, Lin Yun put the other 2 magic gems with the dark fire gem and kept the elemental amber. Now, it was time for the last magic gem. When Lin Yun put his hand back in his pocket, his expression suddenly changed. Lin Yun clearly felt that the last magic gem carried a bone-chilling feeling. Because the Bone Devil's power had been too great and Lin Yun needed to escape, he hadn't paid attention to what magic gems he had found, but now that he had returned to Nocent and checked his loot, Lin Yun finally noticed that this last thing in his pocket didn't seem to be a magic gem at all. But even if that wasn't a magic gem, it might be more precious than all the magic gems he had together. Sure enough, Lin Yun had a cautious expression as he took the object out from his pocket. It was the size of a dove's egg, a sparkling pure black, with a glimmer flashing from time to time. It carried a breathtaking power. Sure enough, it's the Frost Lich Heart apostrophe. In the legends, it materialized after a lich's soul fire was extinguished. A lich was a frightening existence able to contend with a high mage, and its strength wasn't inferior to that of the bone dragon ruling the bone plane. Even if its soul fire was extinguished, it would still possess world-shaking power. Although Lin Yun had never seen a real Frost Lich Heart, the Frost Lich had been mentioned several times among the books of the Decaying Library. Even at the peak of the Magic Era, the Frost Lich Heart had its importance. Thus, there was no need to mention its importance in the current era. This Frost Lich Heart was worth at least 10 abyssal magic diamonds, and if used to maintain the planar path, Lin Yun would be able to stay at least 5 hours in the bone plane next time. He had won that gamble. Even if the elemental incarnation had exhausted all of Lin Yun's mana, even if the Bone Devil's dark fire bullet had almost hit Lin Yun, this didn't matter in front of the Frost Lich Heart. With this Frost Lich Heart, Lin Yun would be able to gradually nibble away at that nether iron vein. But before that, he had to advance to Great Mage. A 9th rank mage would seem very weak in front of a large amount of skeleton warriors, let alone the existence behind them. A bone devil that could contend against high mages. But to advance to become a great mage, Lin Yun would have to carry out his plan. After checking his loot, Lin Yun took another hour to transform the master rank alchemy array with the recently obtained Frostlich heart. After completing this task, Lin Yun put the magic gems and undead essences into his pocket and left the secret passage. Rumi had already been walking around outside for a long time when Lin Yun walked out from the study. Rumi brought 2 pieces of news, a bad one and a good one. The bad news was that Solon had rummaged through the Sage Tower and only found 3 of the materials needed for the mana baptism, meaning that Lin Yun still needed more than half of the 7 items required. The good news was that even if Solon didn't find the other 4 materials, he had given Lin Yun a place where he could find them, the Black Horn auction house that had its events every 3 months. This matter had actually come up coincidentally. Solon had received an invitation to the Black Horn auction house 2 days ago, and it had come with a list of articles that would be sold there. On it were the 4 materials Lin Yun needed. The good news was really good, but the problem was that Lin Yun had no money he could immediately use. He truly had nothing at the moment. The Spectrum potion had brought in 30,000 gold, but it had already been invested in the Gilded Rose. Lin Yun had no more than 50 gold to his name. He hadn't been out for the past 2 months, so he hadn't thought about it, but now that he suddenly had 4 materials to buy, Lin Yun felt a bit put out to discover that he simply couldn't pay. What should I do? The old butler couldn't help. Although the business of the Gilded Rose was pretty good these past few months, since he wanted to thoroughly revive the flashing gold chamber of commerce, all the money earned was invested back to help the store grow more. The cheapest amongst the 4 was estimated at 5,000 gold, while the most expensive could even reach 30,000 gold, and that was just the starting price. If he was unlucky and met a foolish competitor that was overflowing with gold, Lin Yun might not even get it with 100,000. What if I sold the undead essences? But those few pieces of undead essences are worth 10,000 gold. What should I do if I don't have enough? Do I really have to sell the Darkfire gem? That should be used to raise the status of the Gilded Rose apostrophe. Seems like I can only sell the 2 potions I refined. Lin Yun reached inside one of his pockets. Inside were 2 potions he had crafted a while ago. He had thought that he might use them in the bone plane if he met something dangerous, but he had ended up not needing them. He supposed that he could just sell them now. Lin Yun changed into his clean black gown and greeted the old butler before leaving for the Black Horn auction house. The Black Horn auction house was on the Victorious Return Main Street. It was 1,000 meters away from the Gilded Rose, which was on the other side of the main street, and it occupied a large swathe of the street. An astronomical amount of gold flowed in and out of this place every day. Since it had been set up in Thousand Sales City 50 years ago, the Black Horn auction house had always been rather low-key. It never participated in the struggles of Thousand Sales City and always kept a favorable attitude toward every force. At the same time, there was no force that would provoke the Black Horn auction house. Everyone knew that although the Black Horn auction house wasn't revealing its real strength, behind it stood the Black Horn Chamber of Commerce, which could be considered a first-rate force in all of Nocent. As time passed, the Black Horn auction house became truly unconventional, keeping a good relationship with all the forces while also keeping them at a suitable distance, as if it lived outside of the social network of Thousand Sales City. But it was because of this unconventional attitude that the Black Horn auction house's business would get better day by day. 50 years ago, Thousand Sales City had many auction houses, but only the Black Horn auction house still was going strong after 50 years. Because it kept all forces equally distant, people didn't have to worry about being schemed against, even if they couldn't get any consideration. The various forces entangled in Thousand Sales City needed an absolutely neutral place like this, and that was the current Black Horn auction house. Now, Lin Yun was standing outside the Black Horn auction house. After explaining why he had come, someone quickly led him inside. The Black Horn auction house took up a whole section of a street, and sure enough, Its interior was simply like a labyrinth. Lin Yun followed that person for about 10 minutes before arriving in a small reception room. The one receiving Lin Yun was a young man that looked a bit over 20. He was wearing a black gown, with a little stain on the cuff. Lin Yun took a glance and thought, that must be Rainbow Sand Solution. He should be a fairly decent alchemist. Rainbow sand was very expensive, so if an alchemist hadn't reached a certain level, he wouldn't dare to handle such an expensive material so rashly. But it seemed that this alchemist wasn't in a good mood. After seeing Lin Yun coming through the door, he slightly nodded, "Take a seat." Lin Yun scratched his nose and sat in front of the young alchemist. Just as he was about to explain why he had come, the young alchemist waved his hand and impatiently said, "Okay, you can leave me the potion you want to sell and leave. I'll appraise it and then sell it at its proper price. You can come and get your money in a few days." Lin Yun felt a bit uncomfortable with this. "I'm counting on these 2 potions to change my fate. How could I let you appraise them? Moreover, even if I was willing to let you appraise them, seeing how you handle Rainbow Sand Solution, do you even have the ability?" "I'm in no hurry." It could be seen from these words that Lin Yun was improving. If it was Lin Yun from a few months ago, he would have already tornado whipped this guy in the face. Chapter 30, Black Horn Auction. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. But the young alchemist clearly had no idea that he had narrowly avoided a calamity. After hearing Lin Yun's refusal, his face turned unsightly. "Are you afraid of me tricking you? Truly laughable. I have compounded more potions than you would ever see in your lifetime. How could your 2 potions be worthy of me scheming against you? I truly am in no hurry." Lin Yun took a deep breath and just repeated what he had said. Good. Then seeing Lin Yun persist, the young alchemist could only nod angrily. "But I don't have much time. I still have an important experiment waiting for me, so I can only give you 3 minutes. Lin Yun smiled and put the 2 potions on the table. The 2 potions were green, and they carried a dense, irritating smell. After just one whiff, the young alchemist couldn't help frowning. 2 inferior healing potions, valued at 300 gold. It took only 30 seconds for the young alchemist to issue his appraisal. When he put the 2 potions back on the table, he muttered under his breath, "Trash." This time, Lin Yun didn't say anything and picked up the 2 potions as he turned to leave. "Such a joke. You appraised my ghost potion and my volcano potion as healing potions, and with an estimated value of only 300 gold. Do you think I'm a fool?" But just as Lin Yun was heading for the exit, the door to the reception room was pushed open from the other side. The person coming in was an old man. He was easily over 60, with wrinkles, white hair and a white beard. He was wearing a wrinkled, grey gown and was panting as he came in, as if he had run the whole way over. "Did Mage Merlin come in?" "You are?" Lin Yun stopped as he looked at the old man, feeling puzzled, whether it was in his own memories or Mage Merlin's memories. There was no memory of that person at all. Why did this person seem to recognize him? "You are Mage Merlin?" The old man looked at Lin Yun and immediately smiled cordially. "Welcome, Mage Merlin. Let me introduce myself. I am Khadga, Black Horn Auction House's chief appraiser." "Greetings." Lin Yun politely greeted him while pondering what he knew about this person. He had actually heard the name of Black Horn Auction House's chief appraiser, Khadga, quite a few times. He could even be considered a person worthy of being on the same level as Sage Towers Thorpe, as he was also a high mage and a great alchemist. But like the rest of the Black Horn Auction House, he had always been low-key, to the point that many people knew of Thorpe, but not of Khadga. "Oh right, I heard someone outside saying that Mage Merlin came today to have 2 potions taken care of." "That originally was the case, but I just changed my plans." "Eh?" Khadga looked at Lin Yun in surprise, and then he glanced at the young alchemist sitting on the other side of the table, considering their expressions and the circumstances. Could it be that Mage Merlin was offended by this fellow? Judging that this might be the case, Khadga's expression grew unsightly as he looked at the young alchemist. This wasn't some minor matter. Last time, a bottle of Spectrum potion was delivered to the Black Horn Auction House and even Master Wilhelm couldn't stop praising it, saying that this was the most imaginative potion he had ever seen and that some of the techniques used on it were simply unheard of. Before Master Wilhelm left Thousand Sails City, He kept reminding Khadga that he absolutely had to find the alchemist who had compounded this potion. Although the Black Horn auction house hadn't been in contact with Lin Yun for the past few months, it had secretly been making countless investigations. After all, the Black Horn auction house was supported by a first-rate force, the Black Horn Chamber of Commerce. Its formidable information-gathering abilities surpassed the other forces of Thousand Sails City by far. It could be said that as long as the Black Horn auction house wanted, anything happening in Thousand Sails City couldn't be hidden from them. This, of course, included information on the true alchemist behind the Spectrum potion. Naturally, the process of the investigation wasn't that simple. And this was with the Black Horn auction house putting large portions of their forces into the search, toward Loch Merlin, toward the Gilded Rose, toward the Flashing Gold Chamber of Commerce, and toward all of the related clues. Everything had undergone a detailed investigation. Ultimately, they came to a shocking conclusion. That Spectrum potion that received high praise from Master Wilhelm was most likely compounded by a young alchemist in his 20s. That young alchemist's name was Maffer Merlin. Khadga was relatively proud of this conclusion. Compared to the Sage Tower, which was known to be the #1 power of Thousand Sails City, even though they both got the Spectrum potion at the same time, Solomon and his people still believed that a mysterious great alchemist stood behind this young mage, while the Black Horn auction house chose to believe in the conclusions drawn by their investigators. Thinking of this, Khadga smiled. After all, Mage Merlin even stayed in the Sage Tower's library for a very long time. During that time, the Sage Tower had many chances to get in touch with him. But unfortunately, these countless opportunities had been missed by the Sage Tower. Khadga thought that Solomon was probably still having a headache, trying to figure out how to get in touch with the mysterious alchemist behind that young mage. But the current situation that he had just walked in on, what had happened while he was on his way? Don't worry, Mage Merlin. Our Black Horn auction house sincerely wishes to cooperate with you. How about you listen to our offer first before making your decision? That's fine, let's talk about it. For someone of Khadga's status to speak like this, he definitely meant his words, so Lin Yun wouldn't refuse him. Moreover, if it hadn't been for the young alchemist's trash talk, Lin Yun would indeed have sold the 2 potions in the Black Horn auction house. Thus, due Khadga's request, Lin Yun took the opportunity offered. As he listened to the discussion between the two of them, the lifeless young alchemist gulped with some difficulty. Ever since Khadga appeared in the reception room, the young alchemist had suspected that he was dreaming. Otherwise, how could this situation be explained? This was too frightening. The chief appraiser of the Black Horn auction house, Khadga, was actually being so welcoming to a 20-year-old mage. That's right, very welcoming. The young alchemist had worked for 10 years in the Black Horn auction house and had never seen Khadga being so polite. Regardless of whether he was facing Solomon of the Sage Tower or Monchai of the Twin Moons Chamber of Commerce, Khadga had never been as polite as he was today. Who is this young mage apostrophe? Thinking about it, the young alchemist couldn't help swallowing nervously again. At this time, his throat felt terribly dry, as if there was something stuck inside. After all, he hadn't really had a good attitude earlier, and he had muttered audibly that the 2 potions were trash. He couldn't have thought that something like this would ensue. On one hand, he truly was very busy and didn't have much time to spend here, and on the other hand, he disliked the attitude of this young mage, who had visibly shown that he felt uneasy with the interaction. Thus, when evaluating those 2 potions, he skimped on the work. Normally, nothing would come of it, but now, the problem was far too grave. This was a person that even Chief Appraiser Khadga was treating very politely, and he had recklessly offended him. He even felt like dying now, considering how much importance Khadga was paying the 2 potions, even assuring that the Black Horn auction house sincerely wanted to cooperate. What is this apostrophe? From the young alchemist's understanding of Khadga, how could he not understand what these words meant? Khadga had already decided that he would spare nothing to get the 2 potions into the Black Horn auction house's possession. With this realization, the young alchemist couldn't help becoming pale. But fortunately for him, neither Lin Yun nor Khadga paid any attention to the deathly pale alchemist on the side. When Lin Yun changed his mind, Khadga immediately felt happy. He hurried to explain his offer. Mage Merlin, I wonder if you've heard that the Black Horn Auction House holds an auction every 3 months. I have, of course, Lin Yun replied as he nodded. The Black Horn auction was a grand occasion in the whole eastern part of the kingdom, and that was the reason that Lin Yun had come today. Then, Mage Merlin, if you are willing, I hope that you are willing to bring your 2 potions to the Black Horn auction that will happen in a few hours. What do you think? Khadga didn't brag much about the Black Horn auction and also didn't explain what kind of benefits such an auction would bring because he believed that the young mage certainly wouldn't refuse such an offer. Even a great mage couldn't easily climb onto the stage of the Black Horn auction. After all, it was a grand event of the whole eastern part of the kingdom. To be able to climb on that stage was like receiving the recognition of the entire East. Even a great alchemist wouldn't be able to resist such a temptation. Thus, Khadga hadn't elaborated on his offer, only squinting his eyes to see the young mage's reaction. This he hadn't expected, that the originally relaxed Lin Yun would suddenly have an awkward expression after hearing the offer. Khadga froze and didn't manage to react for a long time. He even wondered if his words hadn't been clear enough. In fact, let alone Khadga, even the young alchemist, who had previously inwardly collapsed due to his previous interaction with Lin Yun, couldn't help cursing to himself. You are kidding, this is an event that is attended by the greatest powers of the whole eastern part of the kingdom. Any alchemist getting on that stage would have their social status increase 100-fold. Even if you aren't moved by the offer, how could it feel awkward to you? I'm very sorry. Hi Mage Khadga, I think I won't be able to leave these 2 potions to the Black Horn auction house. After Lin Yun said this, the reception room went dead silent.